My name is Leighan Falley and I fly as a pilot for Talkeetna Air Taxi. I was born in Fairbanks, Alaska, which is a very cold town deep in the heart of the interior of Alaska. I moved to Talkeetna about 13 years ago, and the summer I moved to town I learned to fly. I grew up in Alaska, and so my idea of what a town is and what the bush is different than a lot of people's in the world, I think. So, for instance, Talkeetna is considered it's an urban town for Alaska because we have a road that goes to our town. There's many towns in Alaska, villages that don't have roads to them, and that's the Alaska that's on the road system and the Alaska that's only accessed by airplane are two different Alaskas, and they're very different from each other culturally. I like both sides of Alaska, both the village life that's off the road system and the road system life. Road system life affords a lot of comforts that you can't get in the village, but the villages offer a lot of escape from the craziness of the cities. Life in Talkeetna is wonderful. It's a town of only 700 people, and it's a dead-end road. So the town is all in one spot, and the town is centered around its two runways, like other towns grow up around a highway or a railroad depot. So the town is built up around its runways, and then from here, the roads end and the airplanes begin. My passion for flying comes from living in a big country where there are no roads. And in a place as beautiful as Alaska, you have to have an airplane to see the rest of it. I realized I had to learn to fly when I was growing up, and I could see these huge mountains on the horizon, like Denali far to the southwest, and you can't get there on foot. It's too far away over really hard country, and you have to have an airplane to see the rest of the country. The history of aviation began in Talkeetna with support for gold mining, probably when the airplane came around in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, 1940 through the present day, actually. And so before that, people have been mining the placer deposits in the Dutch and Peters Hills east of town since the early 1800s. And previously, they would come to Talkeetna, which didn't get a road to it until 1966. So they would come to Talkeetna via the river or a trail, and then they would have to get all of their things to the gold mines across many different rivers, swamps, lakes, etc. to get to the gold mines. And so when the airplane came around, people figured out really quick that the airplane is a way better way to get to the gold mine than walking. There's a famous sign in the bar that says, it's an advertisement for one of the early air taxis, and it says, fly an hour or walk a week. The first memory of my entire life is being in the back seat of my father's airplane, and I must have been a tiny baby, but I remember seeing the back of his head, and there was a large husky dog in the airplane with me, and I could feel the airplane moving through the air, and he made a turn, and I could see the trees and the rivers below. That's the first memory of my life. The first time I flew an airplane by myself, they call it your first solo, was probably one of the most amazing feelings of my whole life. Alaska as a land is probably my most favorite place on Earth. I've been to most of the continents and a lot of big mountain ranges, including the Himalaya in Nepal, but I think the Alaska Range in Alaska is my favorite. Alaska is my favorite because it is so big, so wild, and just a vast, untouched wilderness full of, intact biosphere, animals living in their natural habitat, big rivers with no dams on them, no roads, and mountain ranges rising from 100 meters here in Talkeetna to 6,000 meters in less than 100 kilometers. My favorite airplane to fly is the Beaver. I like to fly the Beaver because it's such an iconic Alaskan bush plane. My favorite place to fly from Talkeetna is the Alaska Range, by far. The Alaska Range is my favorite place to fly because it is so vertical, such a grand scale, and it's the most beautiful place in the world I can think of. Flying here day by day has yet to become a routine for me, and I don't think it ever will. The weather is always changing, the conditions are always changing on the glaciers and in the air, and not only is it a really dynamic environment, but it's a really beautiful place. It'd be really hard to get tired of something that beautiful. Landing on a glacier is a lot easier than landing on the runway. When you land on the glacier, we actually use a little bit of a slope in a glacier to slow momentum down. So you land facing uphill and then you turn around and you take off downhill. And if the snow is nice and powder snow, it makes a nice shock absorption for the airplane. It's a very pleasurable thing to do, land on the glacier in deep snow. Before I was a commercial pilot and a mother, I worked as a climbing guide up on Denali, and so I've had the pleasure to go to the summit 6 times out of 12 expeditions and many more trips around smaller peaks in the area. So I worked as a guide for almost a decade for the Alaska Mountaineering School, which is located here in Talkeetna, and also did a lot of personal climbing then as well. I have never been afraid of flying. I like all things that have to do with the air, climbing, flying, all of it. When you try and climb a mountain in the Alaska Range, very rarely do you expect to make it to the summit. Most of the time it's just about a journey that may or may not end in the summit, but involves a lot of hardship and a lot of beauty and a lot of testing of yourself mentally and physically. And it's basically like practicing a martial art in a really, really beautiful place for an extended period of time. My interest in aviation is definitely on the more poetic side. So just the feeling of being in the air and piloting the aircraft and flying through the mountains and landing on the glacier and seeing the things below. And I've learned enough maintenance to help the maintenance department out occasionally and do some preventative maintenance on my own airplane, but not much beyond that. When I take passengers in my airplane, I feel a great deal of responsibility to them. And the first thing I always tell them is that I'm a mother and a good, safe pilot, and that safety is my first priority, but right behind that is showing them the Alaska Range in Alaska, which is stunning. And I've had people start crying because they thought the mountains were so beautiful, my passengers. A bush pilot is a broad definition, and very few pilots in Alaska would refer to themselves as a bush pilot. More you would say, oh, I am a floatplane pilot, or I fly hunters, or I am a glacier pilot, which is what I am. So it's like a species of bush pilot. My next move as a pilot is to fly the de Havilland Otter, and I just received my first flight training today and it went really well. I really wanted to fly the Otter because it's a very powerful aircraft and very capable, and it's just a pleasure and a privilege to fly something like that, piece of machinery like that. There's only a few that exist in the world that are on wheel skis. I think on some level all pilots are escapists. For instance, if I have a really bad day, My first thing I want to do at the end of the day is jump into my airplane and head off into the sunset and don't look back.